good to have you on the show. And we've got another person here from Blockade Australia. Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
I live in the country so-called Australia, which was invaded and colonised in 1788. I'm on Djiringanj Country. I live in a country area with farmlands and bush around me. Um, and I'm 64. I'm
Hmm.
queer, she, her pronouns, and I'm retired from paid work and I'm full-time activist work.
When I spoke to you earlier today. You told me that your partner's in prison right now. Is that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we just did all these. We just had a fantastic mobilisation. My partner was Vickers was on bail at the time. They broke bail, so they were denied police and magistrate bail unless they agreed to a house arrest, which they wouldn't agree to. So they're in remand, um, and they're going back to court again on Monday. So yeah, we don't know what's going to happen. They have to consider all their options and what they're going to do.
You on bail for inaction?
Yeah. So we had a mobilisation a year ago. You might have heard about it. It was in Sydney. It was our first open mobilisation where we invited people to take over the streets of the business, the biggest kind of business city in Australia. And a week before that, we were raided on a. We were out doing preparation for the mobilisation, and there were about, I don't know how many there were of us there. There were 40 police and dogs and helicopters and everything. They got arrested to do with stuff that happened there. Not at the time. They went out. They did do an action on the Monday, and they got arrested, I think, on the Thursday for stuff to do with the raid and stuff to do with walking on the streets without permission. And they've been on bail ever since. So a whole lot of people, 37 people were arrested at that time over that week. They were all on really strict bail conditions, including non-association conditions and not being able to use more than one device. Blah blah blah.
Wow.
Not
Non-association
not
conditions, like, so were they
yeah.
not allowed to associate with anyone from Blockade Australia?
From all the other 36 people on the list. Hmm. Yeah. So they didn't want a repeat of that. They said they'd rather sit it out in prison. This time, cops didn't do well. So far, they haven't done non-association, but they're doing other stuff. Just attempts to shut us down, shut protests down by means of heavy bail conditions.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I know what that's like.
Yeah,
I,
you
I
do.
didn't. I didn't tell you before, but actually, my bail conditions when I came out of prison was I wasn't allowed to talk about protesting with any person or any organisation.
What about like in your head? Were you allowed to do that?
I think I was allowed to do that, yeah. But it was
Oh,
it was merely to
yeah,
stop me from being a spokesperson for Just Up Oil.
yeah,
That got lifted. Those conditions got lifted like about in April, and that's when this podcast was born. So I can talk about
yeah,
protesting as much as I like now.
yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. So I'm on bail um, for the action that I did, but they're not strict bail conditions. I've got to report once a week and can't go within 100 kilometres of um, where the action was, and I can't go to any ports and I can't go to any rails.
Oh, that's pretty funny to be honest.
Well, I live in a country area where there is no rail line, so 100 kilometres in Australia isn't very far.
Oh, it's a big continent, really, isn't it? It's like the size of
Yeah,
Europe.
yeah, it's big and it's just waiting to be dried up into a piece of sand.
Yeah, well, it's already on the way, isn't it? Really, I mean, It's already mostly just desert in the Great Outback, isn't it?
There's a lot of desert in the middle. It's true. Yeah, it's a very diverse ecosystem. Ranges from desert to tropical forests to all kinds of bush. Um, yeah, it's got a bit of everything. Snow. It's in at the moment there'd be places that are having. We're in the middle of winter, so here it's not that cold. I think it's a maximum 16 due today, and overnight 4. We get to minus like 3 or 4. And at the same time, somewhere else, further up north, it's like 35 degrees maximum. So it's a very diverse country.
Can I ask, what's it like having a partner in prison for climate activism?
You're the first person to ask me that.
Really?
I,
That's shocking.
well, it's only been a week. It's only been a week. I mean, people have asked me other stuff, but not that. I guess the first thing that I feel is incredibly proud of them. They took us. They've taken a stand. They they're a very staunch person, very gentle, but also very determined. So I feel incredibly proud of them. I worry a little for them. They're 67. They're non-binary. But I've gotten to talk to them a few times. They sound good. They sound strong. They're getting to know other people in there and do stuff with the people that that they're with, which is lovely.
What's it
Yeah,
been like for you, though? I mean, being separated like that.
I thought I'd avoided that question. It's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it hurts.
You don't have to talk about it if you don't want. There's no.
No, that's okay. I just, I didn't want to cry and scream, but crying's a very important emotion, so I shouldn't hold
Yeah.
it back. When I came home from this mobilisation, it took me a few days to drive back because I was tired. I was really tired. And it's like coming. I haven't done a lot of travel to different countries, but I do remember that feeling coming back after traveling somewhere really different and, that kind of culture shock. So I kind of felt that. I wasn't around, because I live in the country, I wasn't around people that I've just worked very, very intensely with. And so I sort of came home to an empty, cold house. It was beautiful to be home, but I really missed my partner, knowing that they were somewhere really, harsh. Criminal justice system is a really harsh place for all human beings. Shouldn't exist. And I felt sad and a bit sad for myself and tired and a bit lonely, which is kind of weird because I like my own space. It's very, very rare that I would feel lonely, but I felt lonely for a little minute. And then I went out and looked at my veggie garden and found a cauliflower ready to eat and watered the garden because I hadn't been watered in about 3 weeks and got myself organised.
If possible, I'd like to get your partner on from prison. That'd be quite an interesting thing to hear their perspective. Maybe we could organize something where maybe they call you at a
Maybe.
set time and then I call you and we could all chat together. But it depends how they feel
Yeah,
about that.
10 minutes goes so fast.
Oh, they only
They
get
get
they
10
only get
minute
10
phone
minutes.
calls. And then once a week, they're allowed to have a video conference for half an hour, but only one and with only the people that are written into the form that you filled in. So you might get it.
Is that 10 minutes? Can you do like 10 and then 10 and 10 and 10 and keep doing it like that, or is there any kind of other restrictions?
They have been talking. I didn't hear from them in quite a few days, and then suddenly, I got a phone call when I was driving and was out of range, and so I just got to hear their voice. And then the last couple of days they have been ringing a few times because they need to talk about their charges and their case and what's happening. And I'm relaying between them and trying to just be a bit of a bouncing space for them. So they ring up and then they have to wait. They kept getting changed to different places in the prison system. Every time that happens, I don't know what the situation was. But yeah, they can't just ring whenever they want. They have to, I don't know. I don't spend the 10 minutes asking them about that. I'm just grateful when they get a chance to ring.
Yeah, I can imagine. When I was in prison, I got 20-minute phone call, but then I could like hang up and call back straight away again. But I had a phone in my cell, so I could be on the
Oh,
phone like all the time. Yeah.
oh my God, that's fantastic.
Yeah, most
And
of
did
the
you have a list of people that were approved that you could speak to on the phone?
yeah. So I was limited to about 20. You can have 20 people on your call list at any one time, and I had about 60 phone numbers of friends that I wanted to call. So what I'd do is I'd have like 10 people that were on like permanently, and then I'd like
Yeah,
every now and again I'd like knock 3 or 4 people off and add another 3 or 4 people. But I used to spend a lot of my time on the phone.
that's
Most
great. It's a little bit different here. Vickers was saying to me today, I've given permission to my lawyer for you to speak to them because I can't seem to get my lawyer on my list of people to ring.
Really, that's
I know
shocking.
it's not right. And yeah, I don't understand that. Well, I don't understand any of it. But in
Uh,
the 10 minutes that we have, I don't question it. I just say, yeah, what do you want me to pass on? And I write it down.
oh. Well, my heart goes out to you anyway.
Oh, thank you. And to you, having an electronic ankle band on is not, it's not humane.
I've had it on for 6 months now. It's fun times, fun times. So can I ask, what kind of, are you allowed to talk about any of the actions that you've done? Like, I don't want you to get
Yeah.
yourself in trouble. So what kind of actions have you done then?
Um, with Blockade Australia.
It doesn't have to be Blockade Australia, but yeah, in general, what kind of actions have you done?
Yeah, yeah. I did have some early activism in my 20s. I think the first thing I did was I had a baby. I reckon my baby was, I think she was 6 weeks old, and I went with a group of friends out on out to a uranium mine. We camped out there and tried to get over or through the fence, the Honeyman uranium mine. And then it was about it didn't make any difference. We didn't save the world. But about a year later, the Labor government did bring in a three-mine policy. I think that some of the protesting that was direct action, non-violent direct action, may have had an effect. I don't know. And then I was a young feminist in my early 20s. And so the protesting that I did after that was just really mainstream. Walking down the street, reclaiming the night, sort of anti-rape stuff, and International Women's Day celebrations. So it was just really mainstream. And then I also I went to when I was quite young. I went to an anti-abortion laws rally with a very heavily pregnant woman. I think I was about 18 at the time. That felt radical. Um, and but in terms of direct action, I'm just trying to think. I think most of the stuff that I've done, maybe it's because it's the middle of the night here, my brain hasn't returned to normal because my sleeping's all out of sync. But I think it's only been more recently, excuse me, since I've retired that I've thrown myself into getting back into doing more stuff. And for the last however many years, I did a lot of, like I was a Red Rebel in XR. Do you know the Red Rebels?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a beautiful thing I used to do. And did some mobilisations with XR that were, like I was on a kayak and we blocked shipping for a while. We didn't plan for a ship to go by, but one turned up. We had someone that had been on the Sea Shepherd that helped us with water safety stuff. It was a big
Wow.
learning curve.
I love
Um,
Sea Shepherd. Carry on.
yeah, they're great. My partner and I went on a date, and we did a lock on under a ladder that someone sat up the top of and glued on outside a petroleum tanking area to block trucks going in and out. That was fun. Got
Was
arrested
that
for
what?
that.
Was that your date then?
Yeah, it was our date.
That's
It's a
actually
nice
quite funny.
photo of us holding hands in the lock-on device, and that was maybe 2 years ago. Um, I went through the court case for that and self-represented. I'm not anti-lawyers, but I was really keen to do as much as I could that challenged the criminal justice system. It was a very simple case. I was pleading guilty, but I wanted to have a voice in that part of the restrictive system and face some of my fears around, talking in places where there's authority and where the magistrate has all the power. So that was a good experience for me to do that.
I have learned though that you can't, like pouring your heart out in a courtroom. At the end of the day, like the judges, I don't know about in Australia, but in the UK, the judges seem to just like overlook it. Um,
Mm.
you know, they don't really care about that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
I agree with you. Although I did tell a heart-rending story of us going through the Black Summer fires in 2019, 2020, and how we evacuated 6 times and our house nearly burnt down. Um, but what I was trying to do, and what I feel like I did have a really good go at, was working out who had the power at any given time and trying to hold the power. And I don't know about the court system in UK, but here, if you're self-representing, the magistrate has to pay a lot more attention to you because they assume you don't have any legal background and they have to treat you like you're simple, and make sure I understand everything and interact with me. When I'm being represented by a lawyer, if I say something, they say, "You've got a lawyer. You don't say anything." But when I am my own, I don't know if it's, representative, they actually have to interact with me. And I found that process really, really challenging, really, really hard work, but also incredibly empowering to do in terms of my voice and my using my brain to try and work out the best way to to sort of put what I wanted to happen in terms of my criminality and my penalty. And yeah, I'm really interested in pushing that further. I mean, I prefer the system wasn't there, but it's the system currently we're involved in.
You know, so can I hear about some of your actions? What have you done with Blockade Australia then?
Most of my work in Blockade Australia has been in the support of teams. We have a really big community care component. It's a really important part of how we exist. Is the way we set up our interactions with each other, and the level of respect and safety and consent, and the well-being of each other. So it's not based on that, okay, I'm in the community care team, so I go around counselling everyone. It's actually based on upskilling people in how to be really active in their relationships with the people they're working with in their activist work. And so in a sense, kind of upskilling everyone in how to be really good listener and problem solver, and really present with people who are going through really hectic times, things like that. And so I've done lots of workshops for people that are interested in activism spaces around ways to look after ourselves and each other in a non-hierarchical way. And then I've been involved in other sort of similar areas. But this most recent time, and I did tend to go to the mobilisation on the streets rather than just behind the scenes last time. But we had so many arrests that I was actually heavily involved in stuff to do with the Watch House. But this time I chose to be in an action team. I can't actually say much about it, but I will say that I've learnt different sorts of upskilling and got a bit fitter, and took on some really kind of physical roles that, again, I feel super proud of and empowered by. And I'm hoping to be able to use those skills and to support other people in upskilling and do more and more work in that area. Sorry, I'm being super vague.
That's okay. I understand that maybe you can't always give loads of details about what actions and things like that, because you don't want to be giving the police all the evidence that they need, you know. So yeah, I do understand where you're coming from in that regard.
Thank you. Yeah, I was interviewed by someone from one of our big main TV stations recently. They were going to do a show on activism, and they asked me this question. I can't remember what it was, and I said to them, you know, it's actually really irresponsible for you to be asking me a question like that. You're putting myself potentially at risk, and that could actually come back on you. And I would never answer a question like that. I can't even remember what it was, but it was something that would compromise me potentially. And they had not considered that at all. They were apologetic. They were a really nice journalist, actually. They were incredibly apologetic, and that just had not crossed their mind. It was just, for them, it was kind of like, oh, tell us more stuff, and what's the carnival like, and where do you buy the fairy floss? And not really realising the seriousness of the work that we do and the repercussions of the work that we do. And I think it was a learning curve, particularly, hopefully, for her in that regard.
Yeah. Here in the UK, you want to really avoid talking about like the planning of certain actions, because then you get done for conspiracy. I always say I talk about actions on this podcast, actions I've been involved with, but I always say that I didn't have anything to do with the planning. I think if anything was ever to come back from this, all these episodes I've done, then I think I've got to the point where I'm like, well, so be it, you know, because these stories need to be told, really.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I have told my story, as in there's a live stream of me at the end of my action, in terms of where I was and why I was there. So the most recent action is public, is on the public record. I was sitting, I found myself sitting on the top of a coal train on
Wow.
coal, with somebody else, with a 16-year-old, who chose to be there of their own accord. And we did that on a bridge that was over a river. And I'm not sure how high the bridge was. In the police statement that they gave me, they said it was 60 to 70 metres, and I'd like to say it was, because that sounds cool. I don't think it was that high, but it was high.
That is scary.
And I found myself, I like to say this, I found myself in the carriage that was in the middle of that bridge, which made it, and it was two train lines, and the train lines were blocked. Um, and so all that train, which was maybe a kilometre long, full of coal, was stopped, and any other trains that were banking up behind them were stopped. So they couldn't go to the port of Newcastle, which is the largest coal port in the world. And that train was stopped for about 6 hours because they had to work out how to get us off. And
I bet you
the
cost him millions.
yeah, the young it maybe I haven't seen the figures yet. The young person and I were also locked onto each other with a lock-on device, so they had to cut us out as well.
Can I ask about your motivations? Like, what drove you personally? What is it for you that drove you to do an action like that that would put you, you know, that would get yourself arrested and, you know, potentially risk going to prison? Like, what motivated you to do
Yeah,
that?
yeah. I'll tell you firstly what I'm not motivated to do. I'm not motivated to write letters, go to rallies, hold placards on a street, write to politicians anymore. I'm not motivated to put in a submission,
Well, it doesn't
because
achieve
it's all a
anything really, does it?
waste of time. Yeah, I'm unmotivated to do them. I've done a lot of that in the past. I am motivated is kind of the word, but the word that most fits my activism is that I'm driven. I'm driven to act, and I'm driven to act in the most direct way that I can, that I think has the chance of being possibly effective. I have no idea whether what I do will make any difference, or what we do, what all of us do around the world. But I'm driven to do it, out of just because I can see how fucked everything is and how little time we have. It's not just that I'm angry, and I'm not that scared, because I'm quite good with fear, but it just feels like ethically the only thing, the right thing to do. Everything else feels a bit useless. And I have to be really careful as an activist now. I'm pretty new to this, that I don't start to lose interest in other things that aren't directly to do with it, and find that work-life balance or life-work
Yeah.
balance, because I can see how much my energy could be consumed in a way that would not make me useful in the future as an activist. And so for me, I'm also trying to create a non-burnout way of doing this, and have some sustainability. It's very easy for me to do that because the people I work with are so amazing, like literally the most amazing human beings, so brave and intelligent, and caring, that's part of the balance, is knowing that the work environment, the activist work environment that I am in, is a very caring, careful work environment, and that gives me some balance in my own life, as well as tending to my veggie garden and seeing my friends and my family. But
Can I
it
just
is
take you back
very
for a
important.
second? A minute ago, you said, you know, how fucked the world is right now. It does seems like it's the right thing to do, and I really do relate to that, to be honest, because I like to look at these things as, you know, imagine if you were in the future, maybe 20 years in the future, 30 years in the future, looking back at this time when the chance to make a difference has passed, and now, you know, the runaway climate change is now locked in, and there's nothing that anybody can do about it. You know, looking back at that time, you climbed on top of a coal train and stopped a coal train, and probably cost the government like maybe a couple £100 million in lost profits. You know, when you look at it through that lens and that perspective, it really does seem like it is the right thing to do.
One of my activist friends who I really admire, and we've done some good work together. He recently said that he wanted to be a good ancestor, and that he was doing what he was doing to be a good ancestor. He's a lot younger than me, and so I guess he thinks more about the future generations in terms of maybe his family line. I'm not sure, but I really like that. And yeah, I have 3 grandchildren, but I have a village of children all over the world, millions of children, and future generations. I'm an optimist, so that makes doing this kind of work reasonably easy to do. But I'm also a realist, and I actually think we're too late. That makes no difference to me in terms of me doing whatever I can.
Kind of to that point, actually, I've recently come to the conclusion that we are too late to stop runaway climate change now. But
Yeah.
I think if we all mobilise, if we mobilise all the governments and all the corporations in the world, and everyone's efforts in the world, I still think we could save billions of lives. Like there's going to be billions of climate refugees. We could start, for example, moving them early. You know, getting them moving in an orderly fashion, where things won't be all chaotic. We could put things in place like rainwater harvesting and build resilience into our networks. Like I think power lines were in certain countries, like in colder countries, power lines aren't designed for intense heat, and they can melt and fail under intense heat. So we could start building resilience into our infrastructure, and we could start growing food hydroponically indoors on a massive scale to make it protected from climate. And there's just a lot of things. I think we could save billions of lives if we start acting now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I experienced that directly during the 2019-2020 bushfires, spending time in the evacuation campgrounds all together, and we were kind of doing that sort of stuff. I had friends that are comforters, and they were making toilets, because the toilets that were there, the older people with disabilities couldn't get into, and we were preparing areas separate from the bureaucracy that was running the evacuation centre, in case the fires actually came into the evacuation centre. They didn't want to worry people, so they weren't doing any fire planning. It's very bizarre. So we were already running a whole lot of social kind of welfare stuff, and trying to put together a whole lot of infrastructure while we were in an emergency. And I learned a lot about that experience. And I've done a lot of thinking and talking with people during that time and since around the kinds of things communities need to do to prepare. And I'm really interested in autonomous zones now. And I've started introducing the idea locally in the community down here. I think we could probably have one that covered, maybe around 100,000 people. And if we had autonomous zones, if we were developing these in reasonable sizes, then we could be taking in a lot of climate refugees. We could be setting up all sorts of things to help us and the people around us. I'm a really privileged person. I'm white. I've got a pension. I've got a house, and I feel like that obliges me to share not only my resources but my intellect around how to do organising of large groups of people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yes, that I consider that a part of my activism. Doing that at the same time as sometimes gluing onto something or whatever, getting into trouble.
Could you just explain to us, I'm pretty sure I know what you mean by autonomous zones, but for anyone who's listening who doesn't know, could you just explain what you mean by that maybe in a bit more detail?
Yeah, there's a big one in the north of Syria. I forget what it's called. There's one in
Kurdistan.
Mexico. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Kurdistan, I think.
Oh, Kurdistan, yeah. So it must be, it's in Kurdistan, yeah. I think there is I can't remember how many thousands of people live there. It started up a long time ago, like over 20 years, more than 20 years ago. It was planned. And it self-runs separate to the government, and it's kind of sort of recognised by the government. I think they sort of put up with it because they have to. Rohingya, I forget the name. And it's a non-hierarchical community. It's tens of thousands of people, I think. A lot of them are refugees from Syria. As well as obviously Kurds and lots of people who are displaced by war. And they have committees that make decisions, committees for safety, for health, for, for even stuff to do with defence or self-defence because they are in war zone areas, committees for running, the education programs and food supply. That's good old communism.
Yeah.
And they, it's a democratic process without it being a government that's dependent on egos and business interests. It's a community that's dependent on survival and caring for each other.
That sounds incredible.
Not perfect. Yeah, it's not perfect. It has some. It does have a military aspect to it, and it does have some kind of a correctional system. So it's a model in development. But it is amazing to know that large scale stuff is happening and can happen. And I think that I think governments around the world put a lot of energy into not talking about how COVID was a part of climate change. Everyone's affected by climate change. Everyone's affected by COVID. And there was a lot of goodwill that people showed in a lot of places around the world during COVID. And certainly here we had really big lockdowns. We had neighbours sharing food with each other, and people weren't allowed to walk outside of, a 5 kilometre radius for months on end in Victoria. And neighbourhoods would set up little things for kids to see in people's windows as they walked to get some exercise and fresh air. They sound like really simple things, but it's actually community that comes together in an emergency. and does stuff for each other. And, to me, that's, we're already in the climate emergency. It's not like it's going to happen. It is well and truly here. And when you see groups of people and individual people thinking about not just ourselves but each other, and finding ways to be organised, is when that does give me hope.
We need to have more of that, to be honest, in my opinion. A lot more of those self-organising communities. I think it's the way forward. I'm interested, actually. I'm curious. What was it like being in those camps? For the people that were fleeing from the fires, like how many people would you see in a camp usually? Do you think?
Well, this area has a population. This local government area has a population of just over 30,000 people. And there was several evacuation centres across the local government area. The one I was in was coming into and camping was the biggest one. We had horses and chickens and rabbits and dogs and cats, and people brought their boats in, and then we had to say, no, we actually need this space for people. You have to take your boat out. And I don't know how many there was. It was a couple of hundred, maybe 500. Talk about self-organising. There was one that wasn't set up by the Red Cross. It just was people that quickly set something up in the showground in a town called Cobargo, and the state and local government told them to shut it down. This is while there's fires. What? This is why. This is during when you can't even see 5 metres in front of you because the smoke's so full on. And this is during a time where in the daytime it was black, like there was sun, but you couldn't see the sun because there was so much smoke and debris in the air. So like it would be it was black during the daytime. And they said, no, you can't have that evacuation centre. It's not. We haven't said yes to that. And they went, fuck off. We're evacuating. We're here and we're going to run it. And that was an autonomous zone they set up then.
How did the police and the government respond to that then?
I think underneath that they were truly grateful, because there's probably a lot of people that didn't die because they set up that centre. So it wasn't like they were shut down, but they didn't get the kind of support that they needed in terms of supplies. But they couldn't be ignored. And then in the end, they were heroes. And that town was badly burnt. That was one of the first towns in our little area that half of the main street just burnt down. Was New Year's Eve. So yeah, they got a lot of flack, and then they got a lot of praise, only because they couldn't be stopped. So hey, let's do that more.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Did you have any experiences of seeing the wildfires yourself?
Oh man, yeah, we were living in it. I tell you, one of the worst things was seeing black leaves just floating around you. So there was ash and there was smoke, and sometimes you couldn't see in front of you, and there was so much smoke it was in the hospitals. There weren't very many people that died from being burnt to death. There were over 300 people who died from smoke inhalation during those fires.
Wow.
There was smoke in the hospitals. You couldn't get the smoke you couldn't keep it out of anywhere. Babies were being born in smoke. But for me, one of the most, and I saw leaping flames and all of that. But the thing that still I find really deeply affected me was seeing black leaves falling everywhere, just sort of like out of the sky. I actually collected a whole lot of black leaves and put them in envelopes and sent them to politicians. But I wouldn't do that anymore either.
No, it's just a waste of time, really, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
anything you send to a politician, really. You're lucky if they even look at it. They only
Yeah,
care about who's funding them, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You mentioned leaping fires or leaping flames. What did you mean by that?
Well, you know when you look out your house window and you're in a country area and you're seeing like in when we used to have fires, they just kind of burn through areas. You know, they burn through grass and they burn through paddocks and they burn through houses and they burn through bush. But these fires were different. It's a result of climate change. And you would get, what were they called? Something or other cumula. Is it pyrocumula? Or I might have the word wrong. You get these balls of fire. I didn't directly see any, but I saw them happen off in the distance. You'd have these balls of fire that created their own weather pattern, and they would jump a couple of kilometers from where the fire was. So they would like seed the next fire and then seed the next fire, which is very, very terrifying. Um, which is the head of the fire services in Australia, or the ex-head of the fire services in Australia. He was the first person to come out during those fires saying, "This is unprecedented. These are not normal fires. Australia's a dry country. We have fires. I've been fighting fires all my life, but these, I think it was pyrocumulus effects, is something we've never seen before, and there's no turning back from this. This is completely unpredictable, and we're just in a new regime now." And he also talked about that we don't have fire seasons anymore. We're at risk of fires at any time now. In fact, a couple of years ago, we had a fire near us that was in the middle of winter, and it was snowing about about an hour's drive away. And there were these hot winds happening at the same time, and some people lost their houses, and a whole lot of land was burnt. So, yeah, what I could see sometimes when I was early getting ready to evacuate was flames moving across the landscape. It's very scary.
No, I gotta. It's horrifying, really, isn't it? I mean, I did see some of the videos that came out of there, and it genuinely looks like a hellish landscape, really.
Yeah, it doesn't just look like it, it actually is. There's areas of bush now that simply won't grow back. Like the soil is burnt down underneath. So, like, trees are dead, shrubs are dead, all the animals are dead, the insects, like, there's nothing there, but it's like it's dead land.
Yeah.
One thing that I started doing was during the fires, because it went on for about 6 weeks, every time I saw an insect, I'd save it. Like flies, I do swat flies or let them out. I was like I find a fly or a beetle, I'd carry it somewhere where I think it might be safe.
With thing is, with the heating of this planet now, these fires are only going to get worse, in my opinion.
Yeah,
We're seeing now the melting of the Siberian permafrost and the retreating of the Arctic ice, and these things are going to only increase the speed at which the planet's heating up now. So we are going to see a lot more of these wildfires, and we need to start getting things in place to protect people, and build up our infrastructure to protect people and getting these communities ready, and maybe even like having these refuge centres already set up, with all the supplies and everything you need on hand, ready for when these things happen. There's a lot of things we can do.
Right.
There's a lot of things we can do, but it just needs to be made into a priority. It's not a priority for the government, is it?
No, No. One of the things I found out during those fires that the Australian military had been preparing for catastrophic climate change for the previous 10 years. So our
Wow.
government was like, no matter who was in or what politician was speaking, they're like, oh, it's no big deal and doesn't, we're not even sure if it's real. They kept that up really late in the picture, but they were paying the military to do all the research on emergency management 10 years prior to that. In a way, it didn't surprise me at all, because the government's just the puppets of the industries.
Hmm.
Um, but they're completely incompetent in. They would have to have compassion, and they would have to not be there because of their egos, to actually be actually doing things that actually are to do with human beings and the living environment, the living world. And yeah, the government's actually not going to do that. Um, in my live stream, I talked about that, that I think that governments are gaslighting us. They're like, no, everything's okay. We understand about climate change. We're doing what we can. We'll just open up a few more coal mines, and then we promise we'll stop. That's fucking bullshit. The system itself is the problem. In this country, climate change started when the first boats arrived, and the First Nations people were then in a state of attack. And even though the first people that colonised this country might not have been mining, they were setting up tents to start industry.
Hmm.
And everywhere all over the world, colonising is about making money and about just continuing the capitalist agenda. And that there's no ability to consider governing in a compassionate way. The system of government is an absolute failure, and people are suffering for that. It's not a new thing. It's just that because there's climate change, it's just like really obvious. It's like pussy now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's the same all over the world, to be honest.
Yeah,
Governments are
yeah,
incompetent. They really are.
yeah. It's a faulty system. We can't depend on the governments to sort this out. They're the problem.
You say that again, yeah. Right, so we've got about 5 minutes left to round
Oh,
up. I usually do this about an hour long. Um,
okay.
is there anything that you've not talked about that you'd like to share and have heard by people in the UK and whoever else hears this? Is there anything else you want to share that you've not mentioned so far? It's okay,
Um,
nothing comes
I
to mind.
I think no, that there is something that crossed my mind before that I didn't I didn't kind of come back to when we were chatting. Also, I just want to thank you for your very considered questions. It's been really lovely to talk to you. Um, we when we were talking earlier, and you're saying, what's it like having a partner in prison, and just when we were talking about the things that we do, and you were saying how you were forbidden to talk about activism.
Yeah.
Um, After the raid that we had last year, that was just so hectic, one of the things that I started saying to people is they can't lock up our connection with each other. They can't lock up our respect. They can't lock up our love and our compassion and our determination to be better human beings. They can't lock that up. I mean, they can physically put us in prison, but we can take those values and that way of living with us. They will try to take it out of us. But for me, that's part of the activism, is to maintain that connection and that humanity in every action, every activity, every interaction that we have with each other. That is hard work, because, you know, sometimes you're tired and you just want to be cranky and tell everyone to fuck off.
Mm-hmm.
But the way we behave, the way we treat ourselves and each other, is actually as important, in my mind, is to the possibility that we can effectively change the systems that are designed to kill us. And I think there's on my dad's side, they're Holocaust survivors, and I think that there are generations of people that have been through many Holocausts and genocides, and I think that we learn a lot from people who survived that, and aren't completely kind of mad by the end of it, in terms of that human ability to act with integrity no matter what is happening.
Yeah, I can kind of relate to what you said a minute ago about the thing that they can't take away you know, our compassion and things like that. One of the things that I had a bit of a moment last year. I'd been arrested for an action where I climbed up an oil silo, and I was sat in a police cell, and I had this kind of like profound realization, whereas I realized I had something within me that they could not take, and that was my integrity. It was my integrity and my love for this world, and my love for myself as like a being, like those things they could never take from me, and no court could take it from me. So that's quite similar to what you were just saying there.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you had that experience, and that's a part of, you know, considering what you're having to live with at the moment and having to spend so much time under the thumb of the system.
Yeah.
It's nice to know that, yeah, you're under a thumb, but you're not too.
They will not have my compliance.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to round up there. Is there anything you want to say before we finish?
No, but thank you very much, and thank you for your activism and to all the people that you work with. Thank you to everyone.
We are the tongue that speaks the truth. We are the song upon the wind. We are the courage to stand forth. We are the change that now begins. On this good green earth, we will take a stand with an open heart and a healing hand. With an open heart and a healing hand.